Welcome to our first session in this afternoon slot, Circular Change. And for those who weren't here this morning for the full introduction, this is really a moment for us to sort of be reckoning on the ways in which we can actually take all these ideas further. So to introduce the full session, for those of you who are just joining us now, first we will have a conversation between myself and Cathryn, moderated by Becky Earley, which will really be essentially exploring a lot of new ideas around what we've learned from running this event and having the Circular Design Lab discussion and interest group for the past 3 years. And then following that and the conversation we'll be having around those ideas, we'll be welcoming Clare Brass, our keynote speaker, to close the day. So, like I said, this session will be including myself, Laetitia Forst, Cathryn Hall, and like I said, Becky Earley, who will be moderating. But first, we are going to have a bit more of a sort of traditional presentation through which we'll be really sort of introducing how we've been teaching change making and what we've learned from 3 years of TABA.
Great, thanks, Laetitia. So yeah, as Laetitia said, we're thinking about teaching change making and how we make change, and what we've learned in these 3 years, about how we've generated conversations, how we build bridges, and how we are textile designers, but how we've been kind of talking about the circular economy. So just to introduce a little bit more about ourselves, we have kind of been saying this across the day, but I'm Cathryn Hall. I'm an expert in design for mechanical recycling. I'm a PhD student and researcher at the Centre for Circular Design, and I'm specifically looking into the recycling of textiles in the circular economy. Laetitia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes. So yeah, like I said, I'm Laetitia Forst. And my PhD was looking at textile design for disassembly. I'm currently in the very last phases of finishing this PhD. Hopefully it should be done and dusted in about a month. And I've been really happy to do this research at the Centre for Circular Design. And now I'm working at UAL as a postdoctoral research fellow on 2 amazingly exciting different research projects. One of them is part of the Business of Fashion, Textile and Technology project. And in that position, I'm working out of LCF and the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. And on the 1st of October, we started the Hereware project. And I'm also working as a postdoctoral research fellow on that project as part of the Centre for Circular Design. So just a very quick sort of overview of what my research was about. And this is really about giving you an understanding of how Cathryn and my expertise really sort of combined, and how we've been exploring the same issue but from different angles, and how that's actually transpiring through all of our work. So my PhD, as I said, was looking at designing textiles for disassembly. And this was very much based on one of the key challenges of designing for a circular economy, is that we need to design materials so that they can fit in distinct cycles. And we know that if we combine materials from the technical cycle with materials from the biocycle, it makes it really difficult to recycle any kind of combination. But I was interested in the fact that as textile designers, it's just really, really difficult to design. I mean, I don't mean to say that it's impossible. There is a lot of great design in monomateriality, but there are some cases in which it's not necessarily realistic to have a full monomaterial. And we can see it with all the mixed materials that are out there, that there is a need to actually find a way to combine resources in ways which still allow them to be then taken apart and fed into appropriate recycling systems. So I've been looking at how that can be done through designing textiles for disassembly. And this is an example of a series of samples that I developed to show different ways in which we could assemble different resources. So these are actually placeholder materials, and I've been developing all these techniques to imagine ways in which we can be super creative and assemble materials that have a different shine, a different kind of sort of touch feel, different colors, create pattern and texture, but still be able to peel away the different layers or disassemble them in other ways. I also experimented with weaving and soluble threads and things like that. So essentially my research is about really making and doing things, whether these are samples or if it's products and prototypes, And I think I have like this sort of like quite craft focused approach in a way, where it's like the making by hand that becomes really important, and that actually then leads to more overarching methodological models that can really sort of like be adapted and rolled out for innovation in circular systems. You're muted, Cathryn.
Yeah, what if I turn my microphone on? Sorry, guys. So my expertise lie in design for mechanical recycling. And similar to Laetitia, I've been looking into understanding how complicated our textiles can be, and how those blended textiles quite often happen at a sort of a yarn level, which can be really difficult to pull apart, especially when we're waiting for chemical recycling processes to catch up. And so I've been sort of visiting and working in a more industry context rather than a craft context. But I've been visiting factories, feeling and touching and actually seeing the system pan out itself. My research is really focused about thinking about design from recycled. So taking those recycled materials that can be sometimes really problematic, those shorter fibres, how do we work with those to make them long life resources that can go on and on? But then equally thinking about how we can design for recyclability. So if we can take those recycled materials and put them into products, how do we ensure that they can be recycled again and again? And so my research really thinks about this iterative way of using recycled materials and continuing it down to really extend the life of the resources. And that's what I'm really passionate about, and I'm really passionate about the materials and resources that in textiles, and how we can continue those loops further and further. So what is TABA and what is CDL? Now, you might not know exactly what CDL is. I'm hoping that you know what TABA is by now. The fact that you're here, you've got some idea about this symposium. Me and Laetitia have been running this for 4 years. This is actually the 3rd edition of There and Back Again. And each time we've looked at a new theme. We've had a similar sort of format where we've brought speakers in, we've had workshops, a keynote, usually an exhibition, which unfortunately is an online format we haven't been able to do this time. But actually it was really exciting. After the first year of the There and Back Again symposium, we decided that those conversations and those things, after having such a big and wonderful event that we've had over the years, it was such a shame to leave the conversation there. So we developed what's called the Circular Design Lab in conjunction with Becky Earley, who will be asking us questions later, and we're very grateful for her support with this, where we wanted to carry on the conversations with those students, and we would have meetings and discussions, and that's what the Circular Design Lab was. It was a discussion and interest group for the students at UAL. So we want to highlight here that what we do as part of TABA and as CDL, and the things that we've been getting up to over the past 3 years as PhD students, is sort of a continuation of some of the other resources that are out there. We've got the Ellen MacArthur and IDEO, the Circular Design Guide, and also an EU-funded Teaching Circular Design, a handbook for educators. There's plenty of resources out there, and we're hoping that the events that we put on and some of the discussions and conversations are just building on some of the great resources that are out there. We want to really highlight that circular design is a really young discipline. It's really new, and so we're exploring and expanding the whole time, and we're hoping that we'll be able to explore on that. Everything on the slide moves? Okay. And so what we've done is we've tried to sort of expand this conversation, usually in the room, but in this case online, thinking about different ways that we do that in terms of workshops. And we'll be running through, and Laetitia will take us from here before coming back to me, a little bit about how we did that.
Yeah, so first, how did it happen? How do 2 PhD students end up setting up a symposium and a discussion group? Neither of our PhDs are actually about this, but like I just wanted to highlight essentially sort of like the convergence of opportunities which suddenly like made us develop this platform. So one of the first things is that we were both teaching design for sustainability, and we were sort of like interacting with students across UAL, in particular with the MA Textile Design students at Chelsea College of Arts. We're really seeing this hunger like for like more connections, and like really like having great conversations with students, and ourselves feeling a little bit like, you know, like we wanted more and we wanted to keep going with this. And in this respect, I think it's like really important for us to highlight how amazing it has been to be a PhD student as part of the Centre for Circular Design, and how lucky we've been to have the support, have the opportunities to teach whether this was through like the graduate teaching program or like really from being a member of the Centre for Circular Design and being given this platform to really test and hone our skills in research and workshop facilitation. We were able to sort of like travel around and sort of like deliver workshops around the tools that had been developed in past years at the Centre for Circular Design. That includes the 10, that also includes lots of different resources that had been developed by different members of the centre as part of different projects. This has really given us sort of like a breadth of knowledge and understanding around like how our role as designers and researchers could be expanded. Another sort of like amazing thing that was happening at the moment while we were sort of like starting up these different platforms such as TABA and CDL was the fact that there were two really big international research projects that were happening at the Centre for Circular Design. One of them was the Mistra Future Fashion Project and one of them was Trash to Cash. And it was really sort of like putting all this like bubbling knowledge at the forefront, and we were really interested in seeing how we could like create platforms to like have a new way of talking about these things. One of the things that was quite important in both those projects also was putting prototyping and conversations and workshops and all this making and like testing out ideas through this like very textile approach way at the center of the research. And this is really something that I think we've built our understanding of research on also. The third thing that was really key in our development of TABA and CDL was the fact that I think we both were doing our research at a moment, and it's still the case also, where an amazing community of PhD students and early career researchers were doing their work at the same time as us. And the first TABA was actually really a lot about like giving a platform to like all the ECRs and the PhD students to talk about their own research and just like have these conversations together. In a way, the events and the work and the methods that we've been developing are really about sort of like connecting all these different bubbles inside the university, but also connecting to wider disciplines and sort of like opening our networks. And yeah, all the way from like the big communities of researchers down to our communities of practice and understanding how the different ways in which we are designers and how we interact with institutions can like all come together to form this network of circular designers. The last point, which I think is quite important to highlight also, is the fact that we were both lucky to be full-time funded PhD researchers and actually were given the platform and the support from the university to be able to develop all these parallel activities. And research has been really interesting in actually, I mean, it's an area that's very under-researched at the moment, like the whole experience of being a PhD researcher, especially in practice-based areas. But I think it's quite important to highlight how valuable all these different platforms have been and how this journey of creating TABA and having like all these interactions with students and industry stakeholders has really shaped our experience of being PhD students. So all these different elements coming together in such a sort of serendipitous way really like converged into what is now TABA.
Thanks, Laetitia. So why is it special? What is it that we've done that is particularly special? Some of the things might be reiterated based on what Laetitia's been saying, but I really want to highlight that we've had this sort of multi-layered textile perspective. And that really does come from our experience at the Centre for Circular Design and some of the frameworks that we've been introduced to. So what you can see on the right-hand side is the materials, models and mindsets, which was created by Becky at the Centre. And it really is this multi-layer perspective on textiles. So while our PhDs look like they are primarily material focused, actually we've got some of these other things layered on top. So rethinking models like the biological and technical systems and contexts, changing the mind of the industry, community and individual perspective, as well as, of course, thinking about the materials, circularity through material process and innovation. And it's all three of those things converging that we've experienced and had access to through being at the Centre for Circular Design, but going to other events and part of our workshop that has been really, really important. So as researchers, we of course think, but we think in a way that we are designer makers. I love this picture of Laetitia on the left. She's in the Richmond makerspace where she's literally thinking about the materials that she's using and she's laser cutting as part of her PhD research. As I pointed out earlier, in a more industry context, but that doesn't mean that once I've created my materials in industry that I am not feeling them and touching them. And there's actually an image of me when I was doing my MA where I was hand making and knitting materials, and that we think as these designer makers in the context of materials as well as the bigger systems that they sit within. We show a really big part of the There and Back Again symposium usually is our exhibition experience, which has been a part of our a part of the event in the last year. We had a great exhibition, and what was so great about this is that we can disseminate some of not just our research, but we had students' work, we had work from projects at the Centre for Circular Design, and it brings that material research that we've been doing into sort of the public sphere so that industry members, students can really get involved with those material experiments and research that we've been doing, the outcomes and the impact that we can show from that. We talk, and we talk a lot. Doing this presentation, we've talked through all the different events, and of course, definitely through the CDL platform as well, chatting with students. What I love about this picture on this particular slide is it's from last year's TABA where we had Lynn Wilson, and she is doing a more social science focus. She's thinking about the customer and thinking about those mindsets and why we wear clothes and what's in our wardrobes. And she brings such a different perspective to the conversation compared to the research that me and Laetitia's doing. And it's so important to have those conversations, not only with other researchers, with students, with industry, and bringing everyone together, and that's really key and really important. The last thing that I'm going to say before I pass back to Laetitia is that we do, and it's a really important part of TABA that we have workshops. It's this chance to ideate, our research questions and trying to think about how they would actually come off in practice. It really gives the space for students, for industry, for researchers to come together and really sort of mind map and dump all of their ideas onto paper to kind of create change, which is really amazing.
So what have we achieved? So what are the main ideas and what are the sort of outcomes from this iterative process that we've gone through of developing platforms, of testing out new formats through which we can evolve all these conversations and sort of bring as many people as possible around into our network. And I think it's also important to think about how we can develop this model for future PhD students and future researchers in this area who want to consider these ideas. It turns out that Cathryn and I are actually sort of in a reflective phase now of this project, where we're thinking back on what we've learned from all these different iterations and thinking about taking this into publication as our new research project in a way, something to add on to our individual PhD research and something where our expertise as designers really comes together. So one of the things that we're really happy to have been able to do through these platforms is really honing expertise around circular design. And we were really able to sort of address directly the needs of students who were really curious about circular design, who maybe didn't have a specific course in their curriculum that allowed them to sort of unpick it. And through what an idea that we sort of developed from Becky's suggestion, which was circular surgeries. This was, for example, a moment for us to really get individual students into the room. You can see in the picture here, and actually look through their samples and have this conversation, which was really focused on how we can design textiles, materials, and systems for circularity. Another great way of connecting directly with students has been through TABA itself, and actually mentoring student MA speakers. Those of you who are here this morning saw the great range of projects that we've been able to work with, and having these conversations with these students has been such an amazing experience, and hopefully really helpful for them also to take their work and make it available to a wider audience. We've also been taking these conversations beyond the walls of the university. Circular Design Lab was an opportunity to take on exhibition visits and groups of students to go to places, whether this was exhibitions such as the Future Start Here, which was at the V&A, or going to Future Fabric Expo, and really sort of expanding the horizon and understanding how conversations we were having, in the classroom around workshops actually applied to all sorts of different supports that were around London. it also gave us a great opportunity to invite guest speakers and connect in that way to people that we wanted to build sort of like closer ties with. And I think one of the things that was really important for us was like creating this community around circular design. We were able to have regular meetings, and like during term time, we were having CDL sessions once a month. And I think one of the things that's really key to the identity of like what we developed, the fact that it was completely student-led, and that in a way we were connecting PhD researchers to MA students and really acknowledging the fact that we were all doing research in the same area, that we could learn from each other rather than just having a sort of like teacher to student delivery mode. And we were really like able to sort of build bridges across different colleges rather than sort of like more privileged relationships that might exist between sort of academics in specific colleges. We had students from absolutely every college. You saw this morning with the MA speakers also that we covered all the colleges at UAL. And so like going back to how like having guest speakers was a really good opportunity, we were sort of trading expertise. This is Julia Crew here, who came and gave a lecture about her work at one of our CDL sessions while we went to speak to her students at LCF. So it was just a really great way of like having a platform for this kind of knowledge exchange across different colleges. And in that way, I really want to thank the grad community who've been really supporting us, supporting the events throughout the 3 years of like they were happening, and have been great at sort of like disseminating all the information, making sure that we can draw as many students as possible into these conversations. So yes, I really wanted to sort of like close this by thanking all the sort of like people and sort of like all the different organizations inside UAL who've been so helpful in like taking this challenge up of like bridging different colleges and creating this community of circular design thinkers at UAL. And yeah, just to extend a huge thanks to everyone who's been part of these events throughout all these years, and really looking forward to see how this model might actually, you know, grow legs and be taken up by other people. And yeah, do look out for the publications that I hinted at, that Cathryn and I are going to be putting together to disseminate our ideas around this. Thank you.
Hi, Becky.
Hello. Loads of questions for you two, which is fantastic. Hello, everybody. So I'm delighted to be able to talk to you two about TABA. And it strikes me there are sort of three things really to sort of pull out and pick apart in this session. I mean, the first thing, and lots of the questions are about your PhDs. Lots of people are interested in both the subject matter and how you got to decide to do a PhD and how you went about it. So we'll get to those questions shortly. But before we do, I want to sort of basically ask you, why should people care about you putting an event on? You know, everybody's here because they want to find out about circular economy, circular design, materials, all the sort of regular sort of subject matter that we're expecting to explore. Why a conversation about organising an event? Why is that relevant?
I'll take that, Cathryn. Go ahead.
I'll take it to start with, and then you jump in, Laetitia. I feel like this conversation is so important because the reason, and one of the reasons that we started this event in the first place, was because we felt like the conversation wasn't there in the first place. We wanted to connect what I was seeing and what Laetitia was seeing as this amazing research that was going on at the Centre for Circular Design and at various other, you know, parts of the university. There is so much rich research going on. And as a student myself that went to UAL, I was so desperate to engage and to be a part and to hear about that research that was going on. I would have loved to have attended some of these kinds of events. And so when I became a PhD student, I wanted to be able to do that. I wanted to be able to build that bridge and to create that conversation. And it's really important to talk about, because if I can do it, you know, sort of sitting there thinking, oh, perhaps I could put an event on, then other people can as well. And that we can have these conversations going on, not just at UAL, but other universities, with the industry, with academia. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to bring all those people together. I don't know if you want to add anything, Laetitia.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think like a lot of the conversations that we've been having today really highlight the fact that actually achieving circular economies does mean collaboration, and a lot of it, and actually being able to sort of like draw everyone in and And that is essentially what the event was like, what everything that we've built was about and is about. And it's also like, because it's such a new field, so much work that's being put into sort of like really fostering these collaborations and achieving sort of like common grounds of understanding on like what our goals are, and making sure that, you know, no one feels left behind in this conversation. And I think that was one of the things that was really important for us also, was to make sure that it was as inclusive as possible, and bringing like all the students in and giving them an opportunity to actually be part of this like huge change, rather than being taught it like from a very like top-down way.
Brilliant. Yes, of course. So what you're sort of saying is, as designers, and I think we all share textile design as our background discipline, that matters sort of less as time goes on, and as projects change and as audiences change. You know, let's just say design, the skills that are relevant and important but maybe not taught are actually connected to communication, facilitation, and activism as well. And actually you're sort of taking on different roles, but you see them connecting to your design research.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this talk was also a little bit about telling everyone about our journey of like, you know, coming at this from like a perspective of being a textile designer and a maker and making samples, and actually through doing research and through exploring circular design, realizing that it's about a lot more than that. And I think that's what it's been. It's been a sort of a learning platform for us also, to really be able to understand and articulate. And the literature around that is evolving so quickly also, like our role as designers in actually sort of like facilitating conversations, getting the right people around the table, and making sure that change can happen, which is not so much, I mean, it does come like through the making, and I think we are in a good position here to sort of like bridge prototype making and the conversations. But it is a lot more than just about the prototype now, and like communications and collaborations like this are really about putting this forward.
Yeah, Cathryn?
Yeah, I mean, I think being a maker is actually really important. I mean, I have talked about my PhD being part of industry, and I've sort of come away from this kind of craft making activity. But actually that connection and that previous experience of making and testing and trying to understand is really vital. And then when you come away and you kind of look at that bigger picture, which is what we're kind of doing now, and thinking and talking and creating more networks and facilitating and all the other things, it's because of that knowledge that was developed as a sort of maker. So I don't want you in the audience to be sitting there and thinking, oh gosh, that seems really huge and really difficult, and I'm really passionate about making. It's actually the knowledge that you're building up there that you can then transfer it.
So you're transferring the knowledge from making into these contexts to inspire other people, to build community. What exactly do you get back? What learning do you take, and how has that influenced your PhD research?
Do you want to go first?
We both took a very sharp breath in there, preparing. I'll do this one first. I think for me, I wasn't really sure what I was learning when I first started this sort of journey. I was very passionate and very excited, but the one thing, and a really sort of solid example, is from the workshops that we were doing. In the first version of TABA, I created a workshop based on the research I was doing. I wasn't entirely sure what was happening. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to learn, but it turns out that workshop is now fairly central to my PhD. I learned from that workshop by exploring with students some of the ideas that I was doing. I then looked at theory, I went back and did some making, I visited industry, and then it all came back, and I looked at this workshop and I thought, oh my goodness, the ideas of my PhD were there right from the very beginning, and I had explored those. I didn't do them in TABA, I did workshops with other students, and it really just demonstrated that my ideas were there. So actually that's probably something that I have really gained from this experience, even though I wasn't expecting it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Laetitia? I was going to say something very similar about like the opportunity to like do workshops and sort of like have these platforms to test out these like ideation tools that we had, but actually sort of like building on that and taking it a little bit into like what it is like to do a PhD. I think creating this platform for ourselves was a way of really like moving away from the quite sort of like solitary journey that a PhD can be. In a way, by like sort of, you know, starting this wheel turning, we created a pace for ourselves, which meant that we were constantly being dragged forward by the fact that this field is constantly evolving, and we were keeping up to pace with all the changes that were happening. And it just meant that because we were like, you know, flooded with all these ideas and having to sort of like make sure that the conversations we were having in these discussion groups and these symposiums were always relevant, we like completely like moved away from, you know, being the lone researcher in their library, and it's really sort of like given us this like impulse. And I think like we've both managed to like get through our PhD journey in reasonable time. And I think despite the fact we've been organizing TABA for probably about like a quarter of the year every time, it's like we've still managed to like keep this going, and it's been so like refreshing to have that energy like sort of inputted into our research also.
Great, brilliant. To the audience, we have not rehearsed these answers, and I'm trying to make myself smiling when and Laetitia are answering, because I just feel, you know, actually quite emotional at what you're saying. I believe it's so much that, you know, this old model of academia needs to really change to meet the needs and demands of the future, and that by being proactive and building platforms and communicating and taking big risks, putting yourself out there when the ideas are just still forming, and daring to share and get feedback and grow in public, you know, it's brave, but it's actually vital, and I think it's absolutely just the way to work now. There's a brilliant comment in the chat bar from Martha. She says, we all need to be designers and makers of a new, inclusive, collaborative, environmentally and socially ethical, systems-based, generative model. I mean, isn't that brilliant? Isn't that exactly it? And the methods, therefore, of how we get to be designers, how we produce work, you know, the community we're building is so part of our design practice these days. I want to stay with one more question on this subject before moving into the details of your PhD subjects. But materials, textiles, making, yarn, the materiality of what we do, and then this theme of workshops and talks and events. How do those two relate? Where is making and materiality in this sort of talking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that being a textile designer gives you a sense of like how complex like communications are in a way, because you know how to speak with materials and you know how to understand things that are not just verbal, that are not just written. And I think that's part of how we've been developing all these things, is that we understand that we need all these different perspectives, and we need to have moments when, well, unfortunately we can't do this on a digital platform, but where we touch and we see, we have the samples in front of us, so that facilitates the conversation. I mean, and we talk a little bit about boundary objects and how we use those. We use our samples, we use, like, you know, the threads to facilitate these conversations. And I think that really trickles through the way that we've been developing like these collaboration platforms, because we're used to like non-linear like communication and like all these multi-layered textile design perspectives that we were talking about.
Yes, it's a form of communication, and somehow in the middle of these events, these materials on the table, around the table, in the exhibition moments, or handed out to the audience, speak a language and a meaning that can't be articulated. Do you want to build on that a little bit more, Cathryn? Or
yeah, no, I have I totally agree, and I have a slightly different take from being a textile designer, perhaps from a industry perspective. The textile designers are kind of caught in this middle place between fashion designers and where the products are, and then the producers and you know, the materials being sort of developed, and we're in between making these materials that are kind of halfway. And I feel like that kind of really reflects this material conversation, that we have this kind of knowledge as textiles specifically, and there'll be other examples in other areas where these people sort of sit in the middle. And I think that idea of making something that is going to go into something else and has been brought from somewhere else really kind of reflects kind of some of those things that we can kind of bring to the conversation as specifically textile designers.
They're a bit like time travel capsules somehow, moving between moments. That's great, thank you. But okay, specifically then your subject matter, because so many questions have come in around disassembly and about mechanical recycling. So let's just have a quick look at, stay on the screen, Cathryn, and answer this one. You know, what's your approach? What are your thoughts around microfibers and fibrillation and mechanical recycling? In other words, does all that chopping up not make things fluffy and messy?
So it can do. That's the truthful and honest answer, that it can do. But what we need to remember, and I think that the aim of this is that we should first be reusing and remaking our materials before we're recycling, to try and avoid some of those problems. Equally, we heard from Cassandra Quinn this morning, one of our amazing MA speakers, and she was looking at creating coatings to try and make our materials stronger that could be worked up in the future. So there are the sort of technologies coming along. I know we'll be thinking about chemical recycling, and is that better than mechanical? But in terms of trying to extend the resources, sometimes the impacts, yes, we want to avoid microfiber shredding, but we can overcome some of those issues by blending in longer fibers, which at the moment tend to be virgin. I'm going to plug the CCD research book that we've just launched, Research Circles, in which I have written an essay about how mechanical and chemical recycling could work together in the future. I'm sure someone will put the link in the chat later for you to have a look at that. But yeah, so it is, microfibers are a problem, but actually it's an area of research that is really new, and we don't know enough about it. So as that research builds, obviously with my expertise in mechanical recycling, I'm going to be looking at that really carefully and trying to understand how we can move forward in the future. It also coincides with understanding the chemicals and the impacts that are involving in the materials as well.
Yeah, we're learning a lot about microfibers, pollution in the sea at the moment, and fibers and toxicity of fibers, and what fibers being found in animals in the Galapagos, etc. And I think it's time we had a very detailed conversation around textiles, the industry, and fibrillation, because we are learning that the massive bulk of fibers come from production and industry, and not people's washing machines, for example, and they come from many other places. So we'll have that conversation another time. But Laetitia, a question for you about disassembly, and actually lots of questions about disassembly and textiles have flooded in. I think the one about durability is quite interesting. So how do you deal with durability issues if you're going to make something come apartable?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how are you going to help the product last a good while?
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because I was almost expecting another question by Juliana that I just spotted in the chat at the same time, and I thought that was what we were going to be talking about. But I think the idea of durability actually is a really interesting one, because by thinking through design for disassembly, you're kind of turning it around, like you're allowing for modularity, which is almost like the opposite of durability. Like, you're right, it's about like being able to undo things like really, really fast. But one of the ideas behind, I think this was really from right at the beginning of my research, I was really aware of the fact that different materials would have very, very different types of durability. And I think like my vision for textile design for disassembly was to be able to have like a super hard wearing core of a garment, which would be like your durable like core, and that's the bit that we can be durable, because like it's just structural, it's not there to be particularly aesthetic, and it's just there to last. Then you can add other things to it, and those things don't need to be durable at all, because they're designed for recycling. They're probably monomaterials. They might be made of like really sort of like low impact, like fast materials. It could be like I think like, yeah, the vision very far ahead is like a polyester suit that has like paper or like, paper for felt decorations that could be sort of added for different types of padding, could be taken off. In that way, we're actually achieving durability, but also so really catering to the need for durability where it needs to be applied, because it's like, what's the point of having a completely durable, coat that you can't use after 2 seasons because it's completely out of fashion or you're completely sick of it. So I think like, yeah, the conversation is a bit more complex than that. I did start off the research thinking about like recyclability and making sure that all these different things would come apart for recycling, but very quickly actually realized that it was a lot more interesting. I mean, there was a lot of interesting work to be done in thinking about how we could update different materials and how we could embed this sort of like modularity within the textile itself, and think about how that might be able to respond to trend, how it might be able to respond to wear, and thinking beyond this, like, quite restrictive need for durability, and allowing for fashion and for fun, essentially, in it.
Absolutely. So you sort of came away with that disassembly idea that was in furniture, that you need to take it apart in order to send it to the right recycling streams, but the aesthetic finishes and the trends and the very notion of fashion itself and people's interactions and relationships have given you this whole other landscape of disassembly for for change rather than for recycling routes. And that's been quite a big breakthrough piece of work, I think, with a PhD. I'm thinking of the beautiful bio elements that is in the photograph in the book, and they would essentially degrade naturally in compost, wouldn't they?
Yes, yeah.
Away from the base material, leaving the base material, then able to take another embellishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like the image you're talking about really sort of like builds on all the work that a lot of amazing designers have been doing around developing biosequins, but sort of thinking about the biosequin as a detachable element, something that can be sort of like just pulled off and composted. And I think just to sort of like, it sort of takes us a little bit down a rabbit hole, but thinking about designing for disassembly has also led to think about design for assembly. And in the work that like we did together on like developing the service shirt into the service jacket, we actually realized that we could use design for disassembly to extend a product life by actually combining it with something else and taking an existing product and adding something to it so that it could then be sort of like have further use and still be disassemblable and recyclable at end of life. So there's been a lot of, and I think that really ties to what Cathryn was saying around how the textile designer is such a hinge in like all these different processes, and like we sort of like go and slot ourselves in like in between different processes and find ways of removing like bridges to recycling, finding ways of essentially being quite ingenious in the way that we find solutions to problems and just like implement them.
Absolutely, and I think especially within this idea of the expanded role of a textile designer and building and drawing on all these other skills that we have, so that we're sort of initiating other actions and activities. And like Cathryn, you're going into industry and seriously getting people to do things for you, and your research happening in the conversation in the car when the factory owner drives you somewhere, and it's like, how's that textile design? And yet that conversation becomes one of the most important parts of your research. So, I mean, I'm not going to ask you a question about that because I want to move things on, but I'm just noting for the audience that it's so many skills about having conversations and sort of being a textile designer who's looking at the world differently, who's asking different questions, and then using their making skills and material knowledge to bring change. There's some amazing questions coming in from Charles. It's so good the audience are muted. Otherwise, Charles Ross would be wrecking the session right now with all of his noisy questions. We're going to do a session where obviously you're on the panel with us. But I'm not going to pick up on the questions there because we've looked at a little bit at microfibers and fibrillation. Want to do a session on that, absolutely. And we talked a little bit about emotional durability. I think it would be great to just finish by talking about, coming back to the subject, talking about TABA. And there's a couple of questions. Really, one of them is from an MA student saying, what can we do with you guys this year? I'm an MA student, I've just joined, this is great, what are you going to be able to do? And really another question very early on was saying, what's going to happen then with TABA? Are you going to be able to do any more, or will you hand the platform over? Or, and actually, I'll put you on the spot. What do you want?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had amazing support from the university to do this as students, and that support is has to be handed on to the actual students who need to develop this. So like we really hope that other people will approach postgrad community to develop their own interest groups, hope that people will be able to sort of like apply to the different funds that we've been able to like collect to run these events. But I think we're both like we're definitely not stopping in any form or shape. Like we're carrying on doing research at UAL, and we're going to be sort of like keeping all these conversations going, and in a way enriching them with the different research projects that we're going to be taking part in.
Yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful for the last 3 years, and it would be nice to think that even with this session we could inspire other people to kind of take on even something similar elsewhere, or whether you're in UAL and you're thinking about doing something. There are a few funds, I know Laetitia has thanked the postgraduate community. This event really wouldn't have been possible without the PhD Initiative Fund, which is something at CCW, Chelsea, Camberwell and Wimbledon, that we're able to be able to pay for some of our speakers, pay all our speakers in fact, to speak at this event, and it really did make it truly possible, so it's fantastic. So I'd like to thank them. But yeah, just as a final word, anything really is possible. If we've managed to pull off this event, you definitely can. So thank you very much.
Really happy to introduce Clare, who is a designer and a consultant in essentially using societal and environmental issues as drivers for innovation. So Clare has a brilliant track record of setting up Sustain RCA, which was a training unit that really sort of embedded sustainability within the Royal College of Arts. And I think we're going to be hearing a little bit more about her work with Department 22 today, which is a consultancy really looking at, again, embedding sustainability into the industry. Really excited to hear more about Clare and going into a Q&A at the end of this, like we've been doing throughout the day. So welcome, Clare. Really great to see you online here.
Thank you very much. Very nice introduction, and I'm very happy to join you. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking today about one of the themes of the symposium, which is about circular change, and I'm going to tell you a story of the journey that I've had through this change, this circular change, because circularity, going circular, is a journey, and it does take time, and it's not an easy win. It's something that's very long and difficult. So yeah, so I started my professional life in Italy, where I had a product design consultancy, and we used to design all kinds of things. You can go to the next slide, Cathryn. You can see here some of the things that I used to design. I mean, I call this my dirty past, because you know, I designed all kinds of different products. Italy is fantastic for that, because you're not really constrained to one particular sector, but I work very much in the household goods sector, furniture, lighting, as you can see in these images. But the thing is, you can go to the next, yes, that's fine. The thing is with this, my history, is that it never really sat very well with me, and oddly enough, the more successful I became, the more uncomfortable I became. And this is because most of the things I have designed in my life have already been in this kind of landfill probably for a very long time, and they'll be there for a lot longer than I will be alive. So, you know, this knowledge that the better I was doing, the more damage I was doing, just really grated against my values. Next slide, please, Cathryn. So I think this is a big problem for designers, because effectively, you know, in the traditionally accepted role of the designer, whether you're a fashion designer or a furniture designer or whatever it is you do, the more you work, the more damage you do. Now, I never got to meet Victor Papanek, who's you can see in this photograph here, but he did say this absolutely brilliant phrase, which was, there are few professions as damaging as design. And the design profession is all about designing things that people don't need, with money they don't have, to impress people who don't care. And this is very much how I felt at this time of my life, when I was kind of in full professional swing and kind of, you know, making a lot of money actually, but kind of feeling worse and worse about it. Now, the problem is that we as designers are very much a part of a linear system. Basically, we personally, but the work we do means that we extract resources from the Earth's crust, we make stuff with it. Can you click through this actually as I'm speaking, Cathryn? Thank you. We make various things. They get sold in shops or online. we use them for a very short amount of time, and then we dispose of them, usually into a landfill site or into heat from energy processes. And all of that is driven at the same time by the use of fossil fuel energy. And on the one hand, this system, which we have been adopting for a couple of generations now, has generated a lot of wealth and well-being, and it's helped bring millions of people out of poverty. But it can't be a long-term solution, and the consequences on life as we know it have been absolutely catastrophic. But our economy depends on us doing this. So the more we buy, the more damage we create. And the economy is basically built in such a way that this is what we need to do. And this image you can see here is sort of an illustration of this kind of damage. I don't even know if you can see what this image is. Such a horrendous image. It's hard to, in the beginning, to see exactly what it is. But it's a river that has been completely blocked by styrofoam food containers. It's a river in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, and you can see these two people picking around in this sea of waste, and it perfectly represents this linear system that we have, where it's not only what we as end users throw away that's the problem. This is a formula that you can see here that was created by Jonathan Chapman, where he says 40 tons of waste is produced for every 1 ton of product that is made. Of that 1 ton, 98% is thrown in the bin within 6 months of purchase. And this equates to just 1% efficiency, which has 0 future. And somebody was just mentioning before about microfibers in rivers, and saying actually that stuff is probably not coming from consumer waste. It's probably mostly coming from industrial waste. And I think that's the point. We have to turn off the tap. Now, is any of this your fault as a designer? Maybe not. Maybe it's not really your fault. But can you do anything about it? Maybe yes. So in 2003 or 2002 possibly, I decided that I just had to do something about it. So I lived in Milan still, and I took a master's degree in creative entrepreneurship, and I had this idea that if I could use my design skills to create businesses who were born with the purpose of addressing a particular social or environmental issue, then I might be able to stop designing stuff altogether. I just needed to understand what my skills were, and I needed to build some new skills and find out where those skill gaps were so that I could do this. So this degree enabled me to have to learn a bit about business. Now, I think it's really important for designers to be well versed in business if you're going to be a successful professional, but in this case it's absolutely critical. So I needed to find out how to create enterprise. And I realised on this journey that designers have plenty of transferable skills to create environmental and social enterprises. And I also learned that design does equip us to work very well with other professions, but you have to be open to that. So it has to be part of what you set out to do. So for my master's project, I worked with an engineer who was on the same course as me, and we decided together to look for a problem, because the point being, if we could use design to solve a problem, then I was going to prove the point. So we decided to ask Milan City Council what their most complained about issue was, to see if we could design a business proposal around it. And the answer that came back from Milan City Council, rather hilariously, was dog shit. And it turns out that this is in the top 3 most complained about issues in every council across Europe. And this business idea, Skaka, was all about engaging with dog owners to make them feel that picking up after their dog was actually quite a cool thing to do. And our project won the prize for the best business proposal of the cohort, and we got offered a place in an incubator. And at that point, I turned down that opportunity because I did not want to be working for the next 5 years building a business about dog shit. But what it did do for me was I knew that if we could make money out of dog shit, we could make money out of pretty much any environmental problem. So I'm not going to give you a chronological description of what happened in between, but if you roll forward 12 years, since the SCACA project happened, actually more than 12 years, more like 15 years, I have been exploring how to use design as a tool for better thinking, both through my own projects and by helping others understand the power that they have as designers and how they can best apply that power. And as Laetitia said, introducing me, I set up and ran a department. I had the privilege of running a department at the Royal College of Art for about 8 years, where we worked with students all across the college, and you know, many students, and we worked with businesses as well, and you know, played with this idea that design could be used for new kinds of business. And in 2016, I co-founded Department 22 with 2 former students, and now I'm going to show you a selection of projects that touch on issues around the themes of the day, very lightly on 2 of them, and a little bit more in depth on the third: cities, fashion and food. So we started out as a circular economy design consultancy, but gradually our work has come to revolve mostly around the food industry, and this kind of kicked off a couple of years ago when we designed and curated an exhibition at the Rocker Gallery in Fulham. This first category, therefore, is not really about designing things, as you know, as this is not what I do anymore. It's not about designing buildings or products. It's about designing people's lives. And that's because through deeply understanding why people do and don't do certain things, you can redesign the tools and the rules for how they do those things. So if you add into that mix the evolution of technology and changing societal norms, you can begin to create new and different visions for the future. So our exhibition was about the future of food in cities, kind of demonstrating how our cities are going to change and what they'll look like as food production becomes a more integrated part of our city life. And what we did was quite an extensive bit of research to do this exhibition, where we looked to see what designers, architects and entrepreneurs are already taking into account when they're thinking about the future of humanity, and the ideas that are being generated, how those ideas have the power to change our everyday lives. And the exhibition was called London 2026, Recipes for Building a Food Capital, and that's because time actually flows really quickly, and we're used to thinking, you know, we think 2026 sounds a long way into the future, but actually if you think back to when the Olympics happened, it's pretty much the same distance back as it is forward. So there's a lot of the ideas that are in the pipeline. Some of these ideas are already here. Some of them, they will come very quickly, so change is happening. I'm sure you're all delighted by this image, but I'm going to talk just through one project and what it's about that we showed in the exhibition. We had about 25 projects, and so there's no time for me to show them all, and this is just a flavour of what the exhibition was like. And it's about the impact of the meat industry, and as this impact becomes more evident and the necessity to reduce our CO2 emissions becomes more urgent, we are going to need to move away from mammal-based meat production, and people are becoming more aware of this. Now, if you compare cattle, for example, to insects can produce 9 times the amount of protein for the same amount of feed, and you can feed them on scraps of food that humans don't really want to eat, or agricultural byproducts. They require less energy to farm, and they can be cultivated at a much higher density than conventional livestock. They're very high in protein, they're very low in fat, and they're a very good source of vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids. And actually, even though we kind of cringe at this idea, billions of people already enjoy eating insects already as part of their everyday diet. So the project that we highlighted in the exhibition was a project called the Buzz Building by a group in Sweden called Fletcher Architects. And what they proposed was very interesting. They identified 27 roundabouts in Stockholm where currently those are empty spaces, and they designed this buzz building to fit on these roundabouts and become insect cultivation centres. Now you can see from the next slide that this is partially a place where insects are cultivated for food, but also a place where the public can come and enjoy this, being in this building, which is in the centre of which is a beautiful green space. So they're making use of food waste, and they're also making use of unused urban space to cultivate a new food system, which doesn't have to travel very far. So, we're going to see this kind of thinking. This is a hypothetical project, but we're going to see this kind of insect thinking bleed into our everyday lives. And I'll show you in a minute another example of where this is happening. So one of the things that we did in this exhibition, we built this doll's house. We wondered, what would a doll's house look like in 2026 if you put into it all the latest gadgets and equipment that are going to shape our homes. And if you look at these two circles, you can see on the left is a home cultivation unit for edible grubs, and this comes complete with the abattoir tray, so you can grow your own grubs and you can also harvest them in your own kitchen. And on the right of this image, you can see a kitchen composting unit that biodegrades all your household food scraps. And these are not hypothetical. These are actual products that you can already buy on the market. And actually, I have had one of these home composting units for many, many years now. One of many different composting systems that I play with in my own life, because I have a personal fascination with food waste, which I'm not going to go into now because it would be another very long story. And if you want to have a look at the whole virtual tour of this exhibition, you can go onto our website, and here is the address. And I'm sure that Cathryn will be happy to share this presentation with you afterwards if you want to, so you don't have to scribble it all down quickly now. So number two, and I forgot to mention here, the beginning of this was about my background as a designer, kind of designing without thought, and the latter part of my life, so when I dumped my dirty past, is designing with thought. And so these categories, cities, fashion and food, whatever it is you're designing, there is thought to be put into what you're doing. And I obviously, if you're here at this conference, it's because you're already thinking about this, so that is absolutely what we need, and that's brilliant. So I'm going to talk very quickly. I'm going to show two little videos. Fashion industry obviously is one of the most challenging industries because of the very nature of fashion. So a client that we've been working with over the last 2 years has tried to turn this idea of turnover of fashion on its head. And the notion of this project was, if you are a brand, you will buy back anything that your customers have bought from you but don't want anymore. You as the brand will pay them back for it and get that product back, so that you can either recycle it properly, or you can repair it or sell it on again. So if you could play the video here, then we could see what we did for our client in order to help them sell the notion to their clients. So while you're doing that, I'll just explain a bit more about this company. So the company is called Stuffster. And what they're trying to do is be the interface between brands, fashion brands, and their customers, so that the customer can, when they have finished or they don't want that bit of clothing anymore, they know what to do to sell the piece of clothing back to that brand that sold it to them in the first place. So this video explains how that works from a customer's perspective.
Meet Sarah. She loves shopping and she really loves saving money. But she also worries about the environment. Today, she's looking for something to wear, but her wardrobe is just bursting with things she doesn't really like anymore. Then she remembers that her favourite store just started a new scheme, where they actually buy back anything she's bought from them. And she can do this right on their app or website. There, she can see each previous purchase over the last 5 years, tagged with an instant buyback price. She's really surprised to see how some of the great clothes she has bought in the past are still worth quite a lot, and the condition doesn't affect its buyback value. She starts gathering together some of her unwanted clothes to sell back, and realises that even her old socks can be added to the pile. When she clicks on the Get Paid button, a courier is instantly dispatched, or she can schedule the pickup for whenever suits her. A little later, the courier arrives and picks up the clothes for free. The clothes are now on their way to be sold to a new owner. She knows that any unsold items will be responsibly recycled. As soon as Stuffster receives the items, Sarah gets an e-gift card on her phone. She is really pleased. With less stuff in her wardrobe, she can finally see what clothes she has, and she has store credit to spend on her favourite retailer. Above all, she has the comfort of knowing that her unwanted clothes are going to go on being loved. All thanks to Stuffster.
After we had worked with the company to kind of explain what this concept was, it was taken up by a couple of companies, one of which, the biggest investor in this was Adidas, who really embraced this idea and started developing the Stuffster concept with their customers. So this is the film that they created when they launched their own program using the Stuffster concept.
We buy it, we wear it, we throw it away. But there is no away. Piles of plastic and textiles mount up in landfills, slip into rivers, and end up in oceans. That's not okay. We've got to change it, together. Instead of throwing it away, pass it on, and get rewarded for it. So if you upped your game, pass it on. When it's not your sport, pass it on. When only the freshest will do, pass it on. Since you never wore them anyway, pass it on. If you killed it on the pitch, pass it on. Don't throw gear out. Trade it in, we'll collect it. You get rewarded in vouchers, and we'll make sure it's sorted, cleaned, repaired, and reused by someone new, or we'll turn it into something new. If we keep it in play, together, we keep it out of waste. Keep gear in play, don't throw it out.
Okay, so moving on to the third category, most of what we do now is about food, and over the last 10 years we've actually done a huge variety of projects around food. So I'm going to talk about 3 food projects that we've done, and then tell you a little bit more about what's happened to us in the last 8 months since everything went tits up in this country, or across the world actually. So the first project was one that we did through Sustain RCA in 2012. We were asked by McDonald's and Marks and Spencer to see how we could improve the impact of broiler hen production from an environmental and welfare perspective. And our project, well, you know, it's quite often the way with these things. You get these projects come in and you just think, I've got no idea how this is, you know, what on earth can we do? And then you start doing the research and you start digging under a little bit, and you find out so many interesting things about this world, this whatever the world is. You know, you uncover fantastic things that you just didn't know before, and those are the things which provide you with insights which allow you to innovate and come up with, you know, great ideas. So we had the client and we worked with a group of students, and we looked at the life journey of a chicken from 3 different points of view: the farmer's perspective, the consumer's perspective, and of course the chicken perspective. And started this new kind of philosophy of design called animal-centered design, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but you know, it's animal-centered design. So one of the most interesting things we learned, maybe now this is not all that surprising, is that the biggest impact on welfare and environment is what chickens eat. So they're currently fed with mostly with soya and corn, and eating, they're fed in these they're fed constantly in these trays, eating trays, and this does not allow them to engage in typical chicken behaviours like pecking and scratching. And in the course of this research, we came across this animal called the black soldier fly, and in its fly form, it only is a fly for a couple of days, and in its fly form it has no mouth parts, so it's not able to spread disease. And in its short life as a fly, it's actually only interested in one thing, which is reproduction, and it produces hundreds of thousands of really large, juicy maggots that love to feast on chicken waste, but they also are a great source of nutrients for chickens. So they can scratch around in the bedding and look for these grubs and have a very nice time actually, but also the bedding is kept cleaner, and they have much more healthy nutrients than they get in current chicken feed, which is mostly imported from South America. What we realised when we were doing this project is that the life cycle of a black soldier fly maps almost perfectly onto that of a broiler chicken. So through the project, we designed various different ways of adding these larvae into chickens' diets. Now, this was in 2012, and earlier this year I learned about a company called Better Origin. It's just been formed by 2 Cambridge graduates, and that's exactly what they're doing. So they're actually producing black soldier fly larvae that are being added to chicken feed. So it's quite nice in a way, because we were definitely, nothing happened with our project, but I think we were probably just a little bit ahead of our time. And I think customer opinions have also moved on a bit now, because maybe that, you know, is not a great idea. Customers might perceive that as rather an awful thing. So last year, when it was Sainsbury's 150th anniversary, they asked us to create a vision for a report about the future of food. So we put together this report, and actually it was quite a fascinating piece of work for us, because it enabled us to, again, starting with a lot of research, to pick out what the current trends are, and also where we need to be going in terms of food and agriculture. I mean, food, and I didn't mention this, but the reason we work on food issues is because food is responsible for an enormous combination of environmental and social impacts. Just to name one, but I could go on this for hours, you know, our food production system is responsible for about 1/3 of all the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted in the world, which is a kind of a terrifying thought, but also has an enormous potential to be a net absorber of carbon, and also, you know, done properly, a lot of the problems that food is currently causing could actually become offer really good solutions. So that's our interest in food. So thinking about if we are able to convert to better forms of regenerative agriculture, how this might actually change the future of the planet. And the report looked into 3 very distinct periods of time. It looked to 2025, then to 2050, and then to another 150 years into the future, 2169. And each chapter was started with the story of a person. So it looked at what a person was how they were living within that context, and what were they doing in their everyday lives. So one of the concepts we explored in the report was that about, I mean, there are many different ideas in there, and again, if you go and have a look on our website, you can download the report. But one of the most exciting areas is that of lab-grown meat, and that is actually likely to hit the shelves commercially in the next year or so. So if you don't know about lab-grown meat, it basically takes cell cultures from real meat and grows them artificially in a lab. So this means you don't need to, you know, beyond the initial cells, you don't need to kill or even have an animal at all in order to make this meat be produced. And the other exciting thing about this technology from a design perspective is you don't have the current constraints that are from the animal itself. So therefore you can really play with the science, and you can abstract the forms into a whole new world of, you know, appearances, taste, textures, and smells, and so on, and open up huge new possibilities for the culture of eating. And if you're interested in this, I've just written an article last week about the future of meat, and that will be published by the Roca Galleries in Spain. I don't have a link right now, but yeah, have a look for Roca Galleries next week, and you should find a little article about the future of meat, which I think is fascinating. And this is the third project, which is kind of the other end of the scale, a very practical and down to earth and current project, which is all about dispensing of liquid. So, more and more supermarkets and shops now are offering refill stations so that you can refill your shampoo bottles, for example, with new product. And lots of people would be very happy to buy packaging free, but not very many people are currently doing it. And when we looked into this, what we identified was that actually, if you go into one of these shops, like this shop of our client, which is called Hisby in Brighton, you watch people going through the process of trying to fill up their empty bottles, and it's actually almost funny, the chaos that it causes. It's a very difficult thing to do, and it's very messy, and it also causes the staff a lot of challenges for a number of reasons which I don't really have time to go into, but it's a very difficult thing to do well. So we've been redesigning the dispensing units to try to make liquid dispensing better all round for customers and for staff. And then lockdown came, and all of our lovely work, pretty much all of it, just came to a grinding halt. And we sort of knew this was going to happen right at the beginning. And so we decided that it was time for us to become the client and to see how we ourselves could enable people to buy better food, which is kind of what all of our work is really all about. So we started rethinking the thinking. And the question that we posed ourselves is, how can we make sustainable and healthy food more accessible and affordable? And it was quite an interesting opportunity for us, because we have a lot of quite innovative ideas between the three of us. We're three directors, and it was a good time for us to try some of these things out. So just a quick overview of the problem. So if you look at the food sector and you kind of open the hood and you look underneath, it's really not great. And particularly in the UK, the food sector I think is quite a disaster. So this is one factor here. 4 UK supermarkets control 67% of all food purchased, according to the World Health Organization. And this kind of imbalanced economy favours mass food production, which is really bad for our environment and it's really bad for our health. And it all becomes about price, and at the expense of quality and the environment. It's all about getting to the lowest possible price. And this price problem has become the biggest barrier to better food, because we've become accustomed to paying almost nothing for food, or anyway, we don't pay the true cost of food. So people find that when food is produced properly, they find it very expensive. Now, there are ways around this. You can buy directly from producers, but this is a bit inconvenient and it has quite high upfront costs. You can buy in bulk, but then you have to have quite a high outlay, and you have to have space to store things, and you need to be able to eat them before they go bad. Now, the problem for producers, on the other hand, is there are some really good producers out there, but they have limited access to the market, and they either rely on selling large quantities at low margins to retailers or small quantities direct to consumers. So either way, that's kind of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. So what we wanted to do was create a world in which purchasing food that is good for people and good for the planet and producers is as easy and affordable as buying mass-produced shite, which is what we currently get. And if we were in a room, I'm hoping that you'd all be peeling with laughter at this point, but yeah, hopefully that gave you a laugh. And our mission is to offer customers more sustainable, healthy food for less money, to support independent farmers, producers and wholesalers, and to disrupt big retailers through a new direct-to-consumer sales channel. And here it is. It's called Bulkify. We really see this as a tech platform. We are starting with food, but really, this could be applied to anything at all that we would filter as being the most sustainable option. And it's all about facilitating discounted bulk buying with friends and communities. Now, this is not really a new concept. So many neighbours cluster together to make bulk buying groups, and you have community supported agriculture, and in Japan you have this thing called seikatsu clubs, which have more than 300,000 members. They all have some difficulties in terms of logistics and splitting the cost. So our task here is really redesigning two things: how you share economically, how you share food and products, but also how do we are redesigning the logistics of this, because this is a lot to do with how this food reaches you. And what we're finding, which is really, really interesting and exciting, is that through doing the tests that we've been doing, people are really loving the neighbourhood feeling of this, the community feeling of this, and it kind of stimulates actively more neighbourly activities, and we call that social grocery shopping. So how does this tie in with the new world that we are living in? So it's not just the food industry that is changing. Our lifestyles are changing and our priorities are changing. And we've seen quite a lot of that during this lockdown. We're buying more online, just to start with. We're working remotely, we're communicating remotely, and we're shopping remotely much more for our food. We've seen a huge impact, a huge increase in sort of people's awareness of where they live and who they live next to. So we're much more connected to our local area just than we've ever been before, just through this period of crisis. We're more neighbourly, we're trying to support our high street more, and we are more aware of our communities around us. So many of you may already be in a neighbourhood, for example, neighbourhood WhatsApp group, or you may have friends who live close to you that you are offering support through to other people through. And also many people have started cooking and appreciating good food, maybe for the first time. And if you did already cook, I think we've got a little bit of extra time at home to just enjoy cooking, and a little bit of extra time to dedicate to food and the joy of eating. And this brings opportunities for healthier diets, new skills, and more connection with food and where it comes from. And we've also become quite aware now of and particularly through COVID, we've become aware of the links between general health and the food that we eat. And COVID's proven that people who are overweight or obese or have diabetes, or who have other poor health due to lifestyle choices, have lower chances of survival with regards to COVID. And even the government has launched a long overdue campaign now to try to make Brits healthier and fitter. I don't really vouch for the quality of that campaign, but they're kind of moving in the right direction. And we have a fantastic person who's looking at the new food strategy for the UK, who's called Henry Dimbleby, who's really saying all of the right things. So we are seeing an increased demand for healthier foods, for cooking from scratch, and a more understanding of ingredients and sources. And this is the opportunity to rethink how and where we buy food. So we've not officially launched this yet. We're still testing, and you can only participate if you're invited. But if you want to be invited, you're very welcome to get in touch with me. If you live in London, we're not doing this for now outside of London. And we're looking for funding to upscale our technology so that we'll be able to take on new customers in the spring. So yeah, so if you are interested, please follow us on our Instagram account, or you can sign up on the Bulkify website to join us when we officially launch. And of course, if you know anyone who might be interested in investing in the future of food, please do let me know, because this is the moment where we're really looking for funding. I hope that's a very, very short overview of all the things that we've been up to, but I hope that is a good gives you a bit of a picture of what we've been doing. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from you. Then my email is there, and yeah, please do get in touch.
Thanks, Claire. That was really, really brilliant, and I think it really sort of like ties everything that we've been talking about today quite well together, because we have been talking about how we are in circular economies with an emphasis on the plural, and how like, all these different areas really connect together, and how it's not just about the fashion industry on its own, and it's not just about, you know, the food industry, and it's all about changing behaviors, making things easy for people so that we can actually implement these changes. We've had a few really, really brilliant questions in the chat here, so I hope I can like throw those at you.
Try.
in particular two from Becky. So I think the first one actually sort of like ties into what I was just saying about, you know, that sort of transdisciplinarity that really like comes through in your work. And Becky was asking, so in your opinion, should textiles follow the lab-grown meat route, and should we be investing heavily here, or where else should we be investing in terms of like new materials for fashion? Do you have any sort of like insights from your experience in the food industry, like looking at these new practices that could be applied to textiles?
Well, I have to say that, you know, in general, the textile industry and the food industry have a lot in common. So that is a really interesting idea, isn't it? Should we be growing textiles? I wonder if, Becky, you probably know this already, if anyone is already experimenting with this. I think the only thing I can say that's slightly different about meat and, you know, the notion of growing meat and growing textiles is that meat cultures come from a living organism that, you know, comes from it's taken from live cells to begin with, and that can't be said probably of fashion. But why can't we be using, you know, would that be a possibility to use actual living organisms instead of plants organisms to create textiles? I think that's an absolutely fascinating idea. Never thought of it, but that's really, really interesting. And what benefit could that have? You know, what do living cell tissues provide that maybe plant tissues can't provide? So yeah, go for it. Your next PhD student project probably.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. Another one, actually I'm going to try and sort of like combine two things together here, because I think there's some interesting like sort of synergies between those two questions. So one of them is Juliana, who is asking about how we can make sure that we're also creating a strong sort of like consumer value proposition. And I think that's one penchant of it, is like how do you connect with the users? How do you make sure that like behaviors change, that people take on your idea? But on the other hand, Becky is asking if, you know, well, textiles, but I'd like to expand that question to everything, be more regulated, and should it be more tax-based? So I was wondering like where your opinion sort of lands in the spectrum between it has to come from the customer, it has to be easy, that's the only way that it's going to work, or it has to be regulation-led.
Right. So I think this is a very difficult question, and I think the answer is not a very simple, straightforward answer. I strongly believe that the customer, if you don't have customer buy-in, then things won't work. I don't think you can force people to do things unless I think that's a much more interesting thing, to offer people new ways of doing things that are more easier to do, that are more desirable, maybe less costly and more fun. You know, people will change their behaviour. We've seen that in many examples of that over the last, you know, couple of decades. How easy it is for people to change their behaviour if you offer them an alternative that is really interesting for them. So just think about how quickly we shifted from, just this is one example off the top of my head, how quickly we went from vinyl records to downloading music in a very short space of time, where records were a really precious thing that people loved to engage with their, you know, that piece of plastic, and it would go on the machine and you'd put the needle down, and it was a whole cult thing, and that just whoosh went out the window because there was suddenly a better, easier, cheaper way of doing it. So there is a lot to be said for making it better for customers. I also do think, though, that some things you just have to regulate them. I remember many years ago being in a conference, it was kind of like a chat with people from government, talking about whether they should be, what they were going to do about changing people, getting people to stop using incandescent light bulbs. And there was a woman in the room who I really admire a lot. It's called Solitaire Townsend, who runs an agency called Futera. And at the end of a long discussion about, you know, should we can't be forcing people, and, you know, people should just have to do it gradually, she stood up and she said, look, if you give me £2 million, I can persuade 30% of the population to shift to low energy light bulbs in the next 2 years. Or you can just ban incandescent light bulbs. Simple as that. And that is basically what happened. They basically banned, you know, they just took them off the market. So there is a place for legislation. obviously it has to be the right place, and you have to offer a better alternative. I don't think they got it quite right with the light bulbs, actually, because the alternative, the environmental impact of those light bulbs had not been thoroughly understood of the new light bulbs. And the new light bulbs at the time were also pretty awful. They're much better now, but at the time the light quality of those low energy light bulbs was hideous. And so lots of people were my dad went out and bought about 3 box loads of incandescent light bulbs so that he wouldn't have to use the new ones. So, I think, legislation is a great tool, but often quite a blunt tool, and needs to be used together with a real deep understanding of people and people's behaviour. I don't know if I've answered the question.
Yeah, you definitely have. It was a very tricky one, and I think like dropping a pin on that spectrum is really impossible, and it is really about juggling, like what is possible, like knowing who you're speaking with, which is a thing that we have been coming up a lot today also. Yeah, I mean that's really brilliant. We've had like mainly comments around what you've been saying. People have been really engaging with the ideas. I think there's some like a lot of enthusiasm around sort of like the growing and sort of like biofabrication ideas. I think that's been really positive to see that. Cathryn, do you want to comment on anything here?
It's fantastic. I really like this position of both sort of top down from policy as well as involving the customer from coming up. And I think you've really highlighted how key balancing both of those two things really are. I can see loads of comments going, my dad bought light bulbs too, my mother-in-law did. In the chat bar, it's a familiar story, I think, across the board, which is really, really great. I'm aware that we've slightly gone over time, but it's been so fantastic to chat to you today, Claire. So thank you very much. Again, obviously our audience can't come on microphone, but please show your appreciation to Claire in the chat bar with emojis or comments to say thank you. It's been honestly brilliant to have you, and it's been amazing to have your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time in the preparation, and I think you've done an amazing job, and it sounds like you've got a lot of very committed and enthusiastic people on the chat. So yeah, well done for all the hard work you've done as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's been great seeing like in the chat how people are really keen to keep these conversations going and are connecting. Like on LinkedIn, I saw something about a Slack channel being set up. Like it's just really great to see these things happening. And thank you so much, Claire, for coming on. And
thank you so much for all being here. You can let yourselves out of the room once you've finished putting your comments in. It's been a really wonderful day, and yeah, particularly thanks to all of our speakers and for people that have been dipping in and out, but people that have been here all day. It's been really fantastic, so thank you.